Behind the grand walls of Kensington Palace, where centuries of royal traditions have been carefully preserved, a moment of pure human joy was about to unfold that would capture the hearts of millions around the world. In a time when the monarchy faced unprecedented challenges and public scrutiny, one simple announcement would remind everyone why the royal family continues to hold such a special place in people's hearts. This is not just a story about another royal birth, but about love, hope, and the timeless magic that happens when new life enters even the most extraordinary of families. What began as whispered conversations in palace corridors would soon become front-page headlines across every newspaper in the kingdom. But more importantly, it would become a story that proves that beneath all the formality and protocol, the royals are, at their core, a family experiencing the same precious moments that touch families everywhere. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood by the tall windows of the private family quarters, her hands gently cradling something precious against her chest. The palace, usually bustling with the measured footsteps of staff and the occasional sound of official business, held an unusual quietness that morning, as if the very walls understood the significance of what was happening within. It had been exactly 3 weeks since Prince William had made the announcement that would change everything for their family. The announcement hadn't come through the usual formal channels of the royal communications team, nor had it been delivered through the traditional gilt-edged cards that typically announce royal news. Instead, it had happened in the most beautifully ordinary way possible during a quiet Sunday afternoon when the family was gathered in their private sitting room. Catherine remembered that moment with crystal clarity. William had been reading the weekend papers while she worked on some correspondence for her early childhood development charity. Their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, were scattered around the room in various states of relaxation. George was working on a puzzle at the coffee table, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, just like his father when he was focused on something important. Charlotte was curled up in her favorite armchair, a well-worn copy of a horse-riding manual in her lap, though her attention kept drifting to the window, where she could see the palace horses being exercised in the distance. Louis, ever the energetic one, was building an elaborate castle with his wooden blocks, complete with sound effects that occasionally drew gentle reminders about indoor voices from his mother. The peace of that afternoon was exactly what their family needed after what had been a particularly busy period of royal engagements. William had just returned from a successful trade mission to Singapore, where he had represented the crown in discussions about sustainable business practices and environmental initiatives. Catherine had been equally busy with her own royal duties, including the launch of a new program aimed at supporting parents in the early years of child development. The program, which she had been working on for over 2 years, was particularly close to her heart, as it addressed many of the challenges she had observed and experienced firsthand as a mother. The children had felt the absence of their parents during these busy periods, and both William and Catherine were conscious of ensuring that their royal duties never completely overshadowed their roles as parents. They had worked hard to create a family dynamic that, while certainly unique given their circumstances, maintained the warmth and closeness that both of them had valued in their own upbringings. William looked up from his newspaper that afternoon, his blue eyes holding an expression that Catherine had learned to recognize over their years together. It was the look he got when he had been thinking about something important for a while and had finally reached a decision. She set down her pen and gave him her full attention, sensing that whatever he was about to say would be significant. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," he began, his voice taking on the thoughtful tone he used when discussing matters of real importance. Catherine nodded, knowing immediately which conversation he meant. It had been late, and they had been talking quietly in their bedroom after ensuring all 3 children were settled for the night. The conversation had been one they had been dancing around for months, touching on it briefly during quiet moments, but never really diving into the heart of the matter. "About expanding our family," Catherine said softly, mindful of little ears that might be listening despite the children's apparent absorption in their various activities. William nodded, and Catherine could see in his expression that he had given this considerable thought. I know we said we'd wait until things settled down a bit more with the royal schedule, but I keep thinking that there's never really going to be a perfect time, is there? There's always going to be another tour, another cause that needs attention, another responsibility that the crown requires. Catherine felt her heart begin to beat a little faster. They had talked about having another child several times over the past year, but the conversations had always ended with a mutual agreement to wait a bit longer. The demands of royal life were considerable, and they had wanted to ensure that they could give proper attention to both their existing children and any new addition to the family. But as William continued speaking, Catherine realized that his thinking had evolved in much the same way as her own had over recent weeks. Louis is growing up so fast, William continued, glancing over at their youngest son, who is now 5 years old and full of the confidence and curiosity that seemed to define him. And I keep thinking about how much joy each of the children has brought to our lives, to our family, to the whole dynamic of who we are together. Catherine nodded, understanding completely. Each of their children had indeed brought something unique and wonderful to their family. George, now 11, had grown into a thoughtful and responsible young boy who seemed to understand, even at his age, the weight of his future responsibilities while still maintaining the playfulness and curiosity that made him such a joy to be around. Charlotte, 9 years old, had developed into a spirited and independent young girl with a passion for horses and an innate sense of fairness that often impressed the adults around her. Louis, the baby of the family, had brought a sense of lightness and spontaneous joy that kept everyone on their toes and reminded them not to take themselves too seriously. I've been thinking the same thing, Catherine admitted, reaching across the space between their chairs to take his hand. Remember last week when we were visiting the children's hospital, and that little girl asked me if I had any babies at home? When I told her about George, Charlotte, and Louis, she said that sounded like the perfect number for a tea party, but that 5 would be even better for a proper royal feast. William smiled at the memory. The children they met during their royal engagements often provided moments of unexpected wisdom and clarity. 5 for a proper royal feast, he repeated thoughtfully. I rather like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts about what expanding their family might mean. The decision to have another child, while deeply personal for any couple, carried additional considerations for them, given their unique circumstances. There would be the inevitable media attention, the security arrangements that would need to be put in place, the impact on their royal schedule, and the practical considerations of managing royal duties with 4 children. But beyond all of those practical considerations was something more fundamental, the deep desire they both felt to add another member to their family. Catherine had always known that she wanted children, but the joy she had experienced in motherhood had exceeded even her highest expectations. Each phase of her children's development brought new challenges and new rewards, and the idea of experiencing those magical early years again filled her with excitement. So we're really considering this, Catherine said, half statement and half question. I think we're more than considering it, William replied, his voice taking on a tone of gentle certainty. I think we've both already decided, and we're just working up the courage to say it out loud. Catherine felt a warm surge of happiness flow through her. William was right. Somewhere in her heart, the decision had already been made. The logical part of her mind had been working through all the practical considerations, but her heart had been pulling her toward the idea of another child for months. The timing will never be perfect, she agreed, echoing his earlier observation. There will always be official duties and obligations. But our family has always been the foundation that makes everything else possible. And I think another little one would fit right into that foundation beautifully. George looked up from his puzzle at that moment, his attention drawn by the serious tone of his parents' conversation. Are you talking about something important? he asked with a straightforward curiosity that characterized him. William and Catherine exchanged a look, and Catherine could see the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're talking about our family," William told his eldest son, "about how much we love having you and Charlotte and Louis, and how grateful we are for each of you." Charlotte looked up from her book, and Louis paused in his block construction, both children somehow sensing that this was a conversation worth paying attention to. "Families come in all different sizes," Catherine added carefully, not quite ready to share their thoughts about another baby, but wanting to include the children in the conversation. "Some families have one child, some have two, some have three, and some have even more. What makes a family special isn't the number of people in it, but how much love there is to share around." Louis, with the typical directness of a 5-year-old, looked around the room and announced, "We have lots and lots of love. Probably enough for 100 people." Everyone laughed at his enthusiastic assessment, and Catherine felt her heart swell with affection for all of them. Louis was absolutely right. Their family did seem to have an abundance of love to share. "Well, I don't think we need quite 100 people," William said with a chuckle, "but it's good to know we have plenty of love to go around." The conversation moved on to other topics after that, but Catherine could tell that something had shifted. The decision had been made, even if it hadn't been formally announced. Over the following days, she and William continued to discuss the practical aspects of their decision during quiet moments when the children were occupied or after they had gone to bed. They talked about the timing of trying to conceive, considering both Catherine's royal engagements and the various official events that were already scheduled for the coming year. They discussed how to eventually share the news with the children, wanting to make sure each child felt special and included in welcoming a new sibling. They considered the security implications and the need to coordinate with their protection officers to ensure that Catherine would be safe throughout a pregnancy, while still being able to fulfill her royal duties. Most importantly, they talked about their hopes and dreams for this potential new addition to their family. Catherine found herself imagining holding a new baby again, experiencing those precious early weeks when everything was about feeding and sleeping and the miracle of watching a new personality begin to emerge. William spoke about his excitement at the idea of teaching another child to ride a bicycle, to fish in the lake at Balmoral, to understand the history and responsibility that came with being part of the royal family. 2 weeks after that Sunday afternoon conversation, Catherine had wonderful news to share with William. She had suspected for several days that their hopes might be becoming reality, but she wanted to be certain before saying anything. When the test confirmed what she had been hoping for, she felt a surge of joy so powerful that she had to sit down for a moment to catch her breath. She decided to tell William that evening after the children were in bed. She had considered various ways to share the news, from elaborate surprises to simple announcements. But in the end, she chose the approach that felt most true to who they were as a couple. She simply took his hand as they were getting ready for bed and told him, "It worked. We're going to have another baby." William's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: surprise, joy, and then a kind of wondering happiness that made Catherine fall in love with him all over again. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, and for several minutes they just stood there in their bedroom, absorbing the magnitude of what was happening. "Really?" he whispered against her hair, and Catherine could hear the smile in his voice. "Really," she confirmed, pulling back so she could see his face. "I'm about 6 weeks along, I think." William's eyes were bright with happiness and excitement. 6 weeks, he repeated, as if trying to make the reality of it sink in. Our fourth baby, Catherine agreed, and the words felt magical as she said them. They spent the next hour talking quietly about this new development, making preliminary plans about when and how to share the news with others. They decided that they would tell the children first, of course, but they wanted to wait until Catherine was a bit further along, and they had confirmed everything with her doctor. They discussed when to inform the Queen and other senior members of the royal family, and when to coordinate with the communications team about a public announcement. But all of those practical considerations seemed secondary to the overwhelming joy they both felt about this new life that was beginning to grow within Catherine. They had both wanted this so much, and now that it was happening, the happiness felt almost too big to contain. The first few weeks of Catherine's pregnancy had been a whirlwind of emotion and careful planning. She had always been fortunate to have relatively easy pregnancies, but she was also aware that every pregnancy was different and that she needed to be especially careful given her royal responsibilities. She worked closely with her medical team to ensure that she could continue with her scheduled engagements while also taking proper care of herself and the baby. William had been wonderfully supportive throughout those early weeks, taking on additional duties when Catherine needed rest and finding small ways to show his excitement about their growing family. He had always been an attentive husband and father, but Catherine noticed that he seemed to have an extra spring in his step and an increased tenderness in his interactions with her and the children. The children, meanwhile, remained unaware of the coming change to their family dynamics. Catherine and William had agreed to wait until she was through the first trimester before sharing the news with George, Charlotte, and Louis. They wanted to be certain that everything was progressing well before involving the children in the excitement and anticipation. Catherine found herself cherishing these weeks of secret knowledge, when the baby was still just a precious secret shared between her and William. She loved the quiet moments when she could place her hand on her still flat belly and think about the new life growing there. She imagined what this child might look like, whether they would have William's blue eyes or her brown ones, whether they would inherit George's thoughtfulness, Charlotte's spirit, or Louis's exuberance. As she stood by the window that morning, 3 weeks after William's announcement of their decision to try for another baby, Catherine reflected on how quickly their lives had changed. The positive pregnancy test had confirmed what they had hoped for, and now she was already beginning to experience the familiar signs of early pregnancy. The slight fatigue that seemed to descend without warning, the heightened sensitivity to certain smells, and the emotional intensity that made everything seem more vivid and meaningful. She had her first prenatal appointment scheduled for the following week, and she was looking forward to hearing the baby's heartbeat for the first time. With each of her previous pregnancies, that moment had felt like a miracle, the first concrete proof that a new life was really growing within her. She imagined William's face when he heard their fourth child's heartbeat for the first time, and the thought filled her with warmth and anticipation. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows as Catherine finally moved away from her post by the glass. She had royal duties to attend to that day, including a meeting with her early childhood development team and a review of the applications for her latest scholarship program. But underneath all of the practical responsibilities that filled her days, she carried the warm knowledge of the new life growing within her, and the excitement of imagining how this precious addition would change and enrich their family in ways they could only begin to dream about. The weeks that followed Catherine's first prenatal appointment brought a new rhythm to life at Kensington Palace. The confirmation that everything was progressing beautifully with the pregnancy had filled both William and Catherine with a deep sense of gratitude and mounting excitement. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Catherine's trusted obstetrician who had delivered all 3 of their previous children, had assured them that the baby was developing perfectly and that Catherine's health was excellent. The sound of the baby's heartbeat during that first appointment had been every bit as magical as Catherine had anticipated. She had watched William's face as the steady, rapid rhythm filled the small examination room, and had seen the same wonder and joy there that she remembered from their previous pregnancies. The heartbeat was strong and healthy, a tiny drumbeat that seemed to announce this new life's determination to grow and thrive. "Everything looks absolutely perfect," Dr. Mitchell had said with a warm smile as she moved the ultrasound wand across Catherine's barely visible bump. "Based on the measurements, I'd say you're about 8 weeks along, which puts your due date right around early December." A December baby. Catherine had felt a thrill of excitement at the timing. December meant that their new little one would arrive during the festive season, adding an extra layer of magic to what was already the most wonderful time of year for their family. She imagined Christmas mornings with 4 children, the excitement of having a new baby to share in the holiday traditions that were so important to the royal family. William had reached for her hand during the ultrasound, squeezing gently as they both stared at the small, flickering image on the screen. Even at 8 weeks, they could make out the tiny form of their baby, complete with the rapid flutter of the heartbeat that seemed almost impossibly fast and strong. "Have you given any thought to when you'd like to make the announcement?" Dr. Mitchell had asked as she cleaned the ultrasound gel from Catherine's abdomen. "With your previous pregnancies, we typically waited until the end of the first trimester." Catherine and William had exchanged a look. They had been discussing this very question for several days. The timing of royal announcements was always carefully considered, taking into account not just medical factors, but also the royal calendar, public sentiment, and media considerations. "We're thinking we'd like to tell the children first," Catherine had replied. "Perhaps in another 3 or 4 weeks, when I'm a bit further along. Then we'll inform the Queen and the rest of the family and coordinate with the communications team for a public announcement." Dr. Mitchell had nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a very sensible timeline. You'll be well into the safer zone of the second trimester by then, and you'll have had time to adjust to the pregnancy yourselves before dealing with all the external attention." The external attention was something that Catherine had learned to manage over the years, but it never became easy. With each of her previous pregnancies, the media scrutiny had been intense, with every public appearance analyzed for clues about her condition and well-being. Photographers would examine her clothing choices for signs of a growing bump. Reporters would speculate about her health based on her complexion or energy levels during public engagements. And royal watchers would debate everything from her cravings to her exercise routine. Catherine had developed strategies for managing this attention while still fulfilling her royal duties. She worked closely with her stylist to choose clothing that would allow her to carry out her engagements comfortably while maintaining the elegance and appropriateness that royal protocol required. She had learned to pace herself during pregnancy, accepting that some adjustments to her schedule were necessary while still maintaining her commitment to the causes and organizations that depended on her support. The morning sickness that had been a feature of her previous pregnancies had made its appearance right on schedule, though thankfully it seemed to be somewhat milder this time around. Catherine had always found the term morning sickness to be misleading, as her nausea tended to strike at various times throughout the day, often triggered by unexpected scents or sudden movements. She had learned to manage these episodes discreetly, carrying small snacks and sipping ginger tea throughout the day to help settle her stomach. William had become expert at reading the subtle signs that Catherine wasn't feeling well, smoothly stepping in to handle interactions with staff or guests when she needed a moment to recover. During their royal engagements, he would position himself strategically so that he could provide support if needed, and he had developed an almost telepathic ability to sense when she needed to sit down or step away from a situation. Their 3 children had not yet been told about the pregnancy, but Catherine had noticed that they seemed to sense something was different. George, with his naturally observant nature, had commented that his mother seemed extra happy lately, and had asked if everything was all right when he noticed her taking a brief rest during what would normally be an active afternoon with the children. Charlotte, meanwhile, had begun showing increased interest in babies and motherhood, perhaps picking up on some subconscious cues from her parents. She had started playing house more frequently, with elaborate scenarios involving caring for baby dolls and discussing what it meant to be a big sister. Catherine wondered if Charlotte's intuitive nature was somehow detecting the change in family dynamics that was coming. Louis, true to his energetic and affectionate nature, had been especially cuddly with Catherine lately, seemingly drawn to spend more time close to her. During their evening reading sessions, he would curl up against her side and sometimes place his small hand on her stomach, though Catherine was certain he had no conscious awareness of the reason for this instinctive behavior. The decision about when and How to tell the children about their new sibling was something Catherine and William discussed regularly during their quiet evening conversations. They wanted to time the announcement carefully, ensuring that the children would have enough time to get excited and prepare for the new arrival without having to wait so long that the anticipation became overwhelming. I keep thinking about how George reacted when we told him about Charlotte. Catherine mused one evening as they sat in their private sitting room after the children had gone to bed. He was so serious about it, asking all sorts of practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether she would be able to play football with him right away. William chuckled at the memory, and Charlotte's reaction to the news about Louis was the complete opposite. She immediately started planning what clothes the baby would wear and insisting that it had to be a brother because she already had enough dresses for both of them. Louis doesn't even remember life before he was the baby, Catherine added thoughtfully. This will be a completely new experience for him, learning to be a big brother instead of the youngest. I think he'll love it, but it might take some adjustment. They had already begun subtly preparing the children for the idea of change and growth in their family, though without revealing the specific reason yet. During family conversations, they started talking more about how families evolve and grow over time and about the different roles that family members play. They had read books together about new siblings and had encouraged the children to talk about their memories of when each of them had been babies. Catherine's royal schedule during these early weeks of pregnancy had been carefully managed to allow for the physical changes she was experiencing while still maintaining her commitments to the various causes and organizations she supported. Her early childhood development work had taken on an even deeper personal meaning now that she was experiencing the earliest stages of nurturing new life once again. During a recent visit to a family support center in London, Catherine had spent time with new mothers and their babies and had been struck by the universal nature of the experiences they shared. The wonder of watching a child grow and develop, the mixture of joy and exhaustion that came with caring for a newborn, the deep love that seemed to expand endlessly to accommodate each new addition to a family. These were experiences that transcended all social boundaries and connected her to mothers everywhere. One young mother at the center had shyly approached Catherine to thank her for her work supporting families during the early years of childhood development. "Your programs helped me understand so much about bonding with my baby," the woman had said, cradling her sleeping infant. "I never realized how much those first few months would mean for his whole future development." Catherine had been deeply moved by this interaction, thinking about her own growing baby and the incredible journey of development that was already underway. The tiny life within her was already forming neural connections, developing the foundation for a lifetime of learning and growth. The responsibility of nurturing this development, both physically during pregnancy and emotionally throughout childhood, felt both awesome and deeply fulfilling. The security considerations surrounding Catherine's pregnancy were being handled with the same meticulous care that characterized all aspects of royal family safety. Her protection officers had been briefed about her condition and had begun making subtle adjustments to their protocols to ensure her safety while maintaining the discretion that was essential during these early weeks before any public announcement. Detective Inspector James Harrison, Catherine's primary protection officer, had worked with the royal family for over a decade and had extensive experience managing security during royal pregnancies. He understood the delicate balance between maintaining normal royal duties and ensuring the princess's safety and comfort during this special time. The key is making adjustments that enhance security and comfort without drawing attention, he had explained during a private briefing with William and Catherine. "We'll modify routes and timing for engagements to minimize crowds when possible, ensure that medical support is always readily available, and have contingency plans in place for any situation." Catherine appreciated the thoroughness and discretion of her security team. She had learned over the years that the most effective security measures were often invisible to the public, creating safety without creating spectacle. During her previous pregnancies, this careful balance had allowed her to continue her royal duties while feeling confident that both she and her unborn children were protected. As the days passed, Catherine found herself becoming increasingly excited about the prospect of sharing the news with the children and, then, with a wider royal family. She imagined the Queen's reaction to the news of another great-grandchild, knowing that Her Majesty had always taken particular joy in the youngest members of the family. She thought about Prince Charles and Camilla's excitement, and about how the news would be received by William's brother Harry and the rest of their extended family network. The planning for the eventual public announcement was also beginning to take shape, though it would still be several weeks before that became necessary. The royal communications team was already considering the best approach for sharing the news with the media and the public, taking into account the various factors that influence the timing and manner of royal announcements. Sarah Melbourne, the team's senior communications director, had begun preliminary discussions about the announcement strategy. We want to ensure that the news is shared in a way that reflects the joy and significance of the occasion while also respecting the family's privacy during this special time, she had explained during an initial planning meeting. The tradition of royal baby announcements had evolved significantly over the years, with a shift toward more personal and immediate communication methods. While formal announcements were still made through official channels, the royal family had embraced social media and direct communication with the public as ways to share important family news. Catherine found herself thinking about all of these various considerations as she went about her daily routines, but underneath all of the practical planning was a simple, growing excitement about the new life developing within her. Each morning brought subtle changes as her body adapted to pregnancy, and each evening brought new conversations with William about their hopes and dreams for their expanding family. The secret knowledge of the pregnancy had created a special intimacy between Catherine and William during these weeks. They would catch each other's eyes during family meals and share a smile that held all their excitement about the coming edition. They found excuses to touch Catherine's still small bump when the children weren't looking, and William had taken to placing his hand on her stomach each night before they fell asleep, a gesture of protection and connection with their growing baby. As Catherine prepared for sleep each night, she would often spend a few quiet minutes thinking about the incredible journey that lay ahead. In just a few short months, their family of 5 would become a family of 6. Their home, already filled with the energy and laughter of 3 children, would welcome a new voice into the mix. The carefully orchestrated schedules and routines that govern their daily lives would once again be joyfully disrupted by the needs and rhythms of a newborn. She thought about the unique position this child would hold within the royal family, growing up with 3 older siblings who could guide and protect them while also being raised with an understanding of duty and service that was part of their heritage. This baby would be born into extraordinary privilege, but also into a life of responsibility and public service that would shape every aspect of their future. Most of all, Catherine felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this opportunity to experience the miracle of new life once again. Each pregnancy had been a gift, bringing not just a new child, but also new depths of love and understanding about what it meant to be a family. As she drifted off to sleep each night with William's protective arm around her, and their unborn child safe within her, Catherine felt surrounded by love and filled with hope for all the beautiful moments that lay ahead. The moment Catherine and William had been anticipating for weeks finally arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in late October. They had decided that this would be the perfect day to share their wonderful news with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The timing felt right. Catherine was now 12 weeks pregnant, well into her second trimester, and they had received excellent reports from her latest medical appointments confirming that everything was progressing beautifully. William had suggested that they make the announcement during their traditional Saturday morning family breakfast, a cherished weekly ritual when royal duties were set aside, and they could simply be parents enjoying time with their children. These Saturday mornings were sacred in their household, protected from official engagements, and filled with the kind of relaxed family time that Catherine and William both treasured. Catherine woke that morning with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded her of Christmas morning when she was a child. She had been imagining this moment for weeks, picturing how each of their children might react to the news that they were going to become big brothers and sister once again. She had played out various scenarios in her mind, from George's likely thoughtful questions to Charlotte's probable immediate excitement, to Louis's potential confusion about what it all meant. The breakfast room at Kensington Palace had been transformed for the occasion, though subtly enough that the children wouldn't immediately notice anything different. Catherine had asked the kitchen staff to prepare all of the children's favorite breakfast foods: George's beloved pancakes with golden syrup, Charlotte's preferred scrambled eggs with herbs from the palace garden, and Louis's favorite French toast cut into fun shapes. Fresh flowers had been arranged on the table, and the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows created the perfect atmosphere for their special announcement. William was already awake and sitting by the window when Catherine opened her eyes that morning. He had clearly been up for a while, probably thinking through their planned conversation just as she had been doing for days. He turned when he heard her stir, and the smile that spread across his face was filled with the same anticipation she was feeling. "Ready for this?" he asked softly, reaching for her hand as she sat up in bed. "I think so," Catherine replied, though her voice held a slight tremor of nerves. "I keep trying to imagine how they'll react, and I realize I honestly have no idea what to expect from any of them." William chuckled quietly. "That's probably because each of them will surprise us in their own way. George will probably want to know all the practical details immediately. Charlotte will likely start planning the nursery before we finish explaining. And Louis," he paused, shaking his head with amusement. "Louis will probably just accept it as perfectly natural that our family is growing and ask when he can teach the baby to play football." Catherine felt some of her nervousness ease as William's words reminded her of how naturally their children adapted to new situations. They had raised 3 resilient, loving children who had always embraced change with curiosity and excitement rather than anxiety. There was no reason to think this news would be any different. They dressed quietly and made their way downstairs, where they could already hear the sounds of their children beginning to wake up. George was an early riser by nature and could often be found in the breakfast room, reading before his siblings were fully awake. Charlotte tended to wake up with immediate energy and purpose, often already planning her day before her feet hit the floor. Louis was the most variable in his morning routine, sometimes bouncing out of bed with infectious enthusiasm, and other times requiring gentle coaxing to fully wake up. When Catherine and William entered the breakfast room, they found George already seated at the table with a book about space exploration open beside his place setting. He looked up with the slightly serious expression that characterized him in the mornings, offering a polite, "Good morning, Mummy." "Good morning, Papa," before returning his attention to a particularly interesting passage about the solar system. Charlotte appeared moments later, her hair still slightly tousled from sleep, but her eyes bright with the energy that would carry her through the day. She had changed out of her pajamas into riding clothes, clearly planning to spend time with the horses later that morning. "Are we having a special breakfast?" she asked immediately, her keen observation skills noting the extra care that had been taken with the meal preparation. "Everything looks particularly nice today." William and Catherine exchanged a quick glance, realizing that their daughter's sharp eye had already detected that this wasn't an ordinary Saturday morning. "We thought it would be nice to have a lovely breakfast together," Catherine replied carefully, not wanting to give anything away before Louis joined them. "Where is your little brother?" As if summoned by her question, Louis appeared in the doorway, still in his dinosaur pajamas and carrying his favorite stuffed elephant. At 5 years old, he maintained a charming mixture of little boy sweetness and growing independence that never failed to melt his parents' hearts. "Good morning, everyone," he announced cheerfully, climbing into his usual chair and immediately reaching for the orange juice. "Are those my special French toast shapes? They look like stars." The kitchen staff had indeed cut his French toast into star shapes, and Catherine felt a warm surge of affection for the thoughtfulness of everyone who helped make their family life special. These small touches, invisible to the outside world, were part of what made their home feel truly like a sanctuary despite the extraordinary circumstances of their public lives. As they settled into breakfast and conversation, Catherine found herself studying each of her children's faces, trying to memorize this moment before everything changed. George was explaining something he had learned about Jupiter to Charlotte, who was listening with the patient attention of a sister who genuinely cared about her brother's interests even when they weren't her own. Lewis was creating an elaborate story about his French toast stars flying through space to visit George's planets, seamlessly weaving their separate conversations into his own imaginative narrative. This was exactly why Catherine and William had wanted another child. She realized as she watched the easy interaction between her three existing children. The love and camaraderie they shared, the way they naturally included each other in their individual interests and activities, the simple joy they took in being together, all of this would only be enriched by adding another little person to their family circle. William caught her eye and raised his eyebrows slightly in a silent question. Was she ready? Catherine took a deep breath and nodded, feeling her heart begin to beat a little faster with anticipation. "Children," William began, his voice taking on the tone he used when he had something important to share. All three children looked up immediately, recognizing the significance in his manner. "Your mother and I have something very exciting to tell you." George carefully marked his place in his book and set it aside, giving his parents his full attention. Charlotte set down her fork and leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright with curiosity. Lewis continued eating, but watched his parents with the kind of focused attention that showed he understood this was important. "You know how much we love being a family together," Catherine continued, her voice warm and steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "How much we love having you three wonderful children and all the adventures we have together." Charlotte nodded enthusiastically. "We're a very good family," she agreed with the confidence that was so characteristic of her. "We do lots of fun things together, and we take care of each other." "That's absolutely right," William agreed. "We are a very good family, and we take care of each other beautifully. And because our family is so full of love and happiness, we've been thinking about how wonderful it would be if our family grew a little bigger." George's eyes widened slightly as he began to understand where the conversation was heading. His analytical mind was clearly working through the implications of his father's words. "Bigger house?" Lewis asked with typical 5-year-old directness. Catherine smiled at his straightforward question. "Well, sweetheart, families can grow in different ways. Sometimes new people join families, and sometimes—" She paused for a moment, savoring the anticipation of sharing their wonderful news. "Sometimes families grow because a new baby is born." The reaction was immediate and varied, exactly as William had predicted. George's face lit up with understanding and excitement, though he remained characteristically thoughtful in his response. Charlotte gasped audibly and clapped her hands together, her whole face radiating joy. Lewis looked confused for a moment, processing the information, before breaking into a huge grin. "Are you saying we're going to have a new baby?" George asked, his voice carrying both excitement and the slightly serious tone of someone who understood the magnitude of what he was being told. "Yes, darling," Catherine confirmed, feeling a rush of happiness at finally being able to share their secret. "Mummy is going to have a baby, which means you three are going to become big brothers and sister again." Charlotte immediately jumped up from her chair and rushed to Catherine's side, wrapping her arms around her mother in an enthusiastic hug. "Really, truly? We're really going to have another baby." "Really, truly," Catherine assured her, returning the hug and feeling tears of joy prick at her eyes. The pure excitement and happiness in her daughter's voice was everything she had hoped for. Lewis looked around the table with a slightly puzzled expression. "Where is the baby now?" he asked, clearly expecting to see immediate evidence of this new family member. William chuckled softly. The baby is growing inside Mummy's tummy, just like you did before you were born. Do you remember us explaining how babies grow before they're ready to be born? Lewis nodded thoughtfully, though Catherine could see he was still working through the concept. So, the baby is very, very tiny right now. Very, very tiny, Catherine confirmed, placing her hand on her stomach. About the size of a peach right now. But the baby is growing bigger every day, and in about 6 months, he or she will be ready to be born and come live with our family. George had been quiet during this exchange, clearly thinking through all the implications of this news. 6 months, he said thoughtfully. That means the baby will be born in the spring? Actually, in early December, William corrected gently. So the baby will arrive just in time for Christmas. Imagine how special Christmas will be this year with a new little brother or sister. The mention of Christmas seemed to crystallize the excitement for all 3 children. Charlotte began talking immediately about how they could decorate the nursery for Christmas and how the baby would love seeing all the lights and decorations. George started asking practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether they would need to rearrange any of the rooms. Lewis announced that he would teach the baby about Santa Claus and make sure they got extra presents for being born at Christmas time. Catherine felt overwhelmed by the positive response from all 3 children. She had hoped they would be excited, but the immediate acceptance and enthusiasm they were showing exceeded her best expectations. There was no jealousy or concern about sharing attention, just pure joy at the prospect of adding another member to their family. Will the baby be a boy or a girl? Charlotte asked, already planning activities and relationships. We don't know yet, Catherine replied. We won't find out until later, and some families choose to wait until the baby is born to discover whether it's a boy or a girl. What do you think? Should we find out ahead of time or wait for a surprise? This question sparked an immediate and animated discussion among the 3 children. George thought they should find out ahead of time so they could prepare properly and choose an appropriate name. Charlotte was torn between wanting to plan and loving the idea of a surprise. Lewis declared that he didn't care as long as the baby liked to play. As Catherine listened to her children's excited chatter about their future sibling, she felt a profound sense of rightness about their decision to expand their family. The love and acceptance her children were already showing for their unborn sibling, the immediate way they had begun planning and preparing to welcome this new family member, confirmed everything she and William had felt about their family's capacity for love. William reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently as they both watched their children's enthusiastic discussion about names and nursery arrangements and all the things they wanted to teach their new sibling. The secret they had carried for weeks was finally shared, and the response had been everything they could have hoped for, and more. The rest of the breakfast was filled with questions, plans, and expressions of excitement from all 3 children. They wanted to know when they could tell their grandparents and cousins about the baby. They asked about whether the baby would be able to come with them to Balmoral next summer. They discussed whether the baby would prefer horses like Charlotte or books like George or football like Lewis. Catherine found herself laughing at the rapid-fire questions and the children's immediate assumption that their new sibling would naturally fit into all of their family traditions and activities. Their acceptance was so complete and natural that it reminded her once again why she and William had felt so confident about expanding their family. As the morning progressed and the excitement settled into a warm, happy anticipation, Catherine realized that this moment would forever be one of her most treasured memories. The joy on her children's faces, the immediate love they had expressed for their unborn sibling, the natural way they had embraced the idea of their family growing. All of it confirmed that they were making exactly the right choice for their family. Later that day, as she tucked each child in a bed, Catherine was touched by how the news of the baby had already become a natural part of their conversations. George had spent part of the afternoon researching what babies needed and had started a list of helpful things he could do as a big brother. Charlotte had begun planning a welcome party for when the baby came home from the hospital. Louis had announced to anyone who would listen that he was going to be the best big brother and teach the baby everything important about their family. The next phase of sharing their news would involve telling the extended royal family and eventually making a public announcement. But for now, Catherine was content to savor this perfect day when their family secret had been shared with the three people who mattered most, and their reaction had been everything she and William could have dreamed of. The announcement to the extended royal family had been carefully orchestrated over the course of several days following the children's enthusiastic response to their news. Catherine and William had decided to share the information with the most senior family members first, beginning with the Queen, before gradually extending the circle to include other relatives and close friends. The meeting with Her Majesty had been arranged for a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Windsor Castle. Catherine and William had driven out together, both feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness about sharing their news with the Queen. Over the years, Catherine had developed a warm and respectful relationship with William's grandmother, but announcing a pregnancy always felt like a significant moment that required careful consideration of protocol and tradition. They had been ushered into the Queen's private sitting room, where Her Majesty was enjoying her afternoon tea with several of her beloved corgis resting peacefully at her feet. The room was elegant but comfortable, filled with personal photographs and mementos that reflected a lifetime of service and family devotion. Your Majesty. William had begun formally, though his grandmother's warm smile had immediately put them both at ease. We wanted to share some family news with you personally before making any broader announcements. The Queen had set down her teacup and looked at them both with the kind of keen attention that came from decades of experience in reading people and situations. Catherine was certain that Her Majesty had probably already guessed the nature of their news from their manner and the formal way they had requested this private audience. "We're expecting another child," Catherine had said simply, watching the Queen's face for her reaction. The transformation in Her Majesty's expression had been immediate and beautiful. Her formal composure had softened into genuine joy, and her eyes had lit up with the special warmth she always showed when it came to her great-grandchildren. "Another baby," the Queen had repeated, her voice holding both pleasure and satisfaction. "How absolutely wonderful. When is the baby expected?" "Early December, Your Majesty," William had replied. "Catherine is about 12 weeks along, and everything is progressing beautifully." "A Christmas baby," the Queen had mused with obvious delight. "How special that will be for the family. And how are George, Charlotte, and Louis taking the news?" Catherine had smiled as she recounted their children's enthusiastic response to learning about their future sibling. The Queen had listened with obvious pleasure to the stories of Charlotte's immediate plans for the baby and George's thoughtful questions about family logistics. "They're already planning all the things they want to teach the baby," Catherine had concluded. "Louis is particularly excited about having someone smaller than him in the family." The Queen had chuckled at this, remembering well the dynamics of families with multiple children. "There's something very special about watching children welcome a new sibling," she had observed. "It brings out the most wonderful protective and nurturing instincts in them." They had spent another hour with the Queen, discussing practical considerations around the pregnancy and birth, as well as the timing for public announcements. Her Majesty had offered her full support and had expressed particular pleasure that another great-grandchild would be joining the family during such an important time for the monarchy. The announcement to Prince Charles and Camilla had followed a few days later, and their reaction had been equally warm and supportive. Charles had been particularly moved by the news, expressing his joy at the prospect of another grandchild and his admiration for Catherine and William's commitment to family life alongside their royal duties. "This baby will be so fortunate to grow up surrounded by such love," Camilla had said warmly, embracing Catherine with genuine affection, "and to have 3 older siblings who are already so excited to welcome them." The gradual process of sharing the news with other family members had continued over the following weeks, with each conversation bringing its own special moments of joy and connection. Catherine had been particularly touched by the responses from some of the younger royals, who had shared their own excitement about having a new cousin to spoil and enjoy. Meanwhile, the practical preparations for the public announcement had been moving forward under the careful guidance of the royal communications team. The timing of royal baby announcements was always significant, taking into account not just medical considerations, but also public sentiment, media schedules, and other royal family events. "We're thinking that next week would be ideal for the announcement," Sarah Melbourne had explained during a planning meeting. "Catherine will be 14 weeks along by then, which is well into the safe zone medically. The timing also works well with the royal calendar and gives us space before the busy Christmas season begins." The announcement would follow the modern royal tradition of sharing the news through multiple channels simultaneously. A formal statement would be released through official palace channels, while a more personal announcement would be shared through the family social media accounts. The approach balanced the formality that royal protocol required with a more direct communication style that the younger generation of royals had embraced. Catherine had been involved in crafting the announcement, wanting to ensure that it struck the right tone of joy and gratitude while maintaining the dignity appropriate for a royal communication. The statement would be simple and straightforward, sharing the family's happiness while requesting privacy during the early stages of the pregnancy. The announcement day itself dawned crisp and clear, with Catherine waking to find that her morning sickness had been particularly mild, which she chose to take as a good omen for the day ahead. She and William had agreed that they would spend the morning at home with the children, allowing them to experience the excitement of their family news becoming public while surrounded by the comfort and security of their private space. The official announcement was scheduled for release at precisely 11 o'clock in the morning, coordinated across all royal communication channels. At 10:45, Catherine and William gathered their children in the family sitting room to explain that their special family secret was about to become public knowledge. "Remember how we talked about telling other people our exciting news about the baby?" Catherine had asked, settling onto the sofa with Louis curled up beside her and Charlotte perched on the arm of William's chair. "Today is the day when we tell everyone," George had said, demonstrating his understanding of the significance of royal announcements. "The newspapers and the internet and everyone who cares about our family." "That's exactly right," William had confirmed. "And that means that lots of people are going to be very excited for us, just like we're excited. But it also means that there might be photographers and reporters who are especially interested in our family for the next few days." The children had nodded seriously. They had grown up understanding that their family's life was a public interest, and they had learned to navigate the balance between their private family time and their public roles with remarkable grace for their ages. At exactly 11 o'clock, Sarah Melbourne had called to confirm that the announcement had been successfully released. Within minutes, Catherine's phone had begun buzzing with congratulatory messages from friends and family members around the world. The formal statement, which read simply that Their Royal Highnesses the Prince and Princess of Wales are delighted to announce that the Princess of Wales is expecting their fourth child. The baby is due in December, had been accompanied by a more personal message on their social media accounts expressing their joy and gratitude for the support of the public. The media response had been immediate and overwhelmingly positive. News outlets around the world had picked up the story, with headlines celebrating the expansion of the royal family and speculating about everything from potential names to the baby's place in the line of succession. Royal correspondents had appeared on television programs to discuss the significance of the announcement and to share insights about royal pregnancy traditions. Catherine had watched some of the coverage with a mixture of amusement and amazement at the level of public interest in her family's private joy. She understood that their position meant that their personal milestones became public celebrations, but it never ceased to surprise her how genuinely excited people seemed to be about royal babies. The messages of congratulation that poured in throughout the day had been particularly touching. Leaders from around the world had sent formal good wishes, while ordinary citizens had shared their excitement through social media and letters to the palace. Many of the messages had included personal stories about pregnancy and family growth, creating a sense of shared experience that transcended social boundaries. "Look at this one," William had said, reading from a letter that had arrived by special delivery. "It's from a family in Scotland whose fourth child was born last month. They're saying that 4 is the perfect number because there's enough love to go around and enough chaos to keep life interesting." Catherine had laughed at the sentiment, thinking about how accurately it described their own experience of family life. The controlled chaos of managing 3 children's schedules and interests and personalities had indeed kept their lives interesting, and she could only imagine how wonderfully complicated things would become with a 4th little person in the mix. The afternoon had brought a visit from some of William's closest friends, who had wanted to offer their congratulations in person. The easy camaraderie and genuine happiness of these longtime friends had reminded Catherine of how fortunate they were to have such a strong support network. These were people who had known William since childhood, who had watched their relationship develop, and who had celebrated each of their children's births with genuine joy. "For kids," one of his friends had said with a mixture of admiration and mock terror, "You're really going for it, aren't you? I can barely manage 2 without losing my mind completely." The secret is excellent staff and the fact that Catherine is essentially superhuman, William had replied, earning a laugh from Catherine and a chorus of agreement from their friends. As evening approached and the initial excitement of the public announcement began to settle into a more sustainable rhythm, Catherine had found herself reflecting on how perfectly the day had gone. The children had handled the public attention with maturity and excitement. The family's inner circle had responded with warmth and support, and the broader public reaction had been overwhelmingly positive. That night, as she and William were getting ready for bed, Catherine had placed her hand on her still small bump and thought about how much their baby's life had already changed in just one day. This morning, their little one had been a cherished family secret. Tonight, he or she was being celebrated by people around the world, already loved by strangers who were excited to welcome another member of the royal family. "No going back now," William had said with a grin, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Would you want to go back?" Catherine had asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not for a second," William had replied without hesitation. "This feels exactly right. Our family, this baby, the way everyone has responded today, all of it feels like exactly what was meant to happen." Catherine had nodded, feeling the same sense of rightness that had guided them throughout this journey. From that first conversation about expanding their family to this moment when their news was being celebrated around the world, everything had felt natural and joyful and completely aligned with their deepest desires for their family. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Catherine had thought about all the months ahead, the gradual growth of her pregnancy, the preparations for the baby's arrival, the excitement of her children as they anticipated their new sibling, and eventually the magical moment when they would hold their 4th child for the first time. Each phase of the journey ahead held its own special anticipation, and Catherine felt grateful beyond word for the opportunity to experience it all surrounded by so much love and support. The baby growing within her was already so wanted, so anticipated, so loved by their family and by the wider world that had embraced their joy. As Catherine fell asleep with William's protective arm around her and their unborn child safe within her, she felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the abundance of love that surrounded them and the beautiful future that lay ahead for their growing family. The weeks following the public announcement had settled into a rhythm of joyful anticipation mixed with the careful management that characterized all aspects of royal family life. Catherine was now 16 weeks pregnant, and the subtle changes in her figure were becoming more apparent, though still easily concealed beneath the carefully chosen outfits that allowed her to continue her official engagements with comfort and elegance. December had arrived with the first hints of winter's approach, and the palace staff had begun the elaborate preparations for the Christmas season that would be particularly special this year. The anticipation of celebrating the holidays with a newborn had added an extra layer of excitement to all the traditional arrangements, from the selection of the Christmas tree to the planning of family gatherings. Catherine stood in the nursery that was slowly taking shape on the third floor of Kensington Palace, her hand resting on her now visible bump as she surveyed the progress that had been made over the past few weeks. The room had been carefully designed to create a peaceful, welcoming environment for their new baby while maintaining the elegant standards appropriate for a royal nursery. The color scheme was soft and neutral, with gentle creams and sage greens that would work beautifully regardless of whether the baby was a boy or a girl. William and Catherine had decided to wait until the birth to learn their child's gender, preferring the surprise and excitement of discovery in those first magical moments after delivery. The children had been divided in their opinions about this decision, with George supporting the element of surprise, while Charlotte had campaigned strongly for finding out ahead of time so she could plan more specifically. The furniture was a mixture of new pieces and carefully restored antiques that had been used by previous generations of royal children. The crib was particularly special, a beautiful piece that had been crafted specifically for this baby, but designed in the traditional style that connected this new little one to the long history of royal infants who had slept in similar beds. Catherine moved to the window and looked out over the palace gardens, where the first light snowfall of the season was beginning to dust the bare branches of the trees. The view from this window would be one of the first things their baby would see of the world beyond the nursery, and Catherine loved imagining those future moments of holding her newborn child while looking out at the changing seasons in the garden below. The preparations for the baby's arrival had been comprehensive and carefully coordinated. Dr. Mitchell had been monitoring Catherine's pregnancy closely, and all reports continued to be excellent. The baby was growing perfectly, active, and healthy, with a strong heartbeat that filled Catherine and William with joy each time they heard it during appointments. The security arrangements for the birth had been finalized in consultation with the Royal Protection Team. Catherine would deliver at St. Mary's Hospital in London, the same hospital where she had given birth to all three of her other children. The medical team was the same group that had attended her previous deliveries, led by Dr. Mitchell and including specialists who had extensive experience with royal births. The logistics of managing a royal birth were complex, involving coordination between the medical team, security services, palace staff, and communications personnel. Plans have been made for every possible scenario, from the timing of the labor to the arrangements for announcing the birth to the public. A notice would be posted on an easel outside Buckingham Palace in the traditional manner, while more immediate announcements would be made through modern communication channels. William had been particularly involved in ensuring that all arrangements would allow him to be present for the birth and to spend as much time as possible with Catherine and the new baby in those crucial first days. His royal schedule had been carefully managed to ensure flexibility around the due date, with other family members prepared to step in for any engagements that might need to be postponed or reassigned. The children's excitement about their coming sibling had continued to grow throughout Catherine's pregnancy. George had appointed himself as the family expert on baby development, regularly sharing fascinating facts he had researched about what the baby was doing during each week of pregnancy. He had informed everyone that the baby could now hear sounds from outside the womb and had taken to reading aloud from his favorite books each evening, wanting to introduce his future sibling to some of the stories that had been important to him. Charlotte had channeled her anticipation into elaborate plans for the baby's first year of life. She had created detailed charts showing which family member would be responsible for teaching the baby various important skills, from riding horses to proper table manners to the fundamentals of royal protocol. Her organizational skills and natural leadership abilities had impressed her parents, who could see that she was going to be a wonderfully protective and nurturing big sister. Louis had perhaps the most straightforward approach to preparing for the new baby. He had designated himself as the official entertainer and had been practicing songs and silly faces that he was certain would make the baby laugh. He had also been carefully selecting toys from his own collection that he wanted to share with his new sibling, demonstrating a generosity and excitement that melted his parents' hearts. The extended royal family had embraced the coming addition with equal enthusiasm. The Queen had taken particular interest in the preparations, sharing stories from her own experiences of raising children and offering advice based on her long perspective on royal family dynamics. She had also made arrangements for a special christening gift, commissioning a piece from the royal jewelers that would become an heirloom for this new great-grandchild. Prince Charles had been equally involved, expressing his joy at the prospect of another grandchild and his admiration for the way Catherine and William were balancing their royal duties with their growing family responsibilities. He had shared some of his own memories of welcoming children and had offered practical advice based on his years of experience managing royal obligations alongside fatherhood. The public interest in Catherine's pregnancy had remained high throughout the months since the announcement, but it had settled into a more sustainable level of attention that allowed the family to maintain some privacy while still acknowledging the genuine excitement that people felt about the royal baby. Catherine had continued with a modified schedule of royal engagements, choosing appearances that aligned with her interests and energy levels while ensuring that her most important causes continued to receive support. Her work with early childhood development had taken on even deeper meaning during her pregnancy, as she experienced firsthand, once again, the remarkable process of human development that began before birth and continued through those crucial early years. During a recent visit to a parenting support group, she had been struck by a conversation with a young father who spoke about the overwhelming love he had felt from the moment his daughter was born. "You think you understand love before you have children," he had said, "but then you hold your baby for the first time and realize you had no idea what love really meant." Catherine had nodded in complete understanding, remembering the transformative moment of holding each of her children for the first time. The love that flooded through her in those first moments had been unlike anything she had ever experienced, immediate and overwhelming and absolutely life-changing. She was looking forward to experiencing that miracle once again, to feeling that rush of protective, nurturing love that seemed to expand her heart beyond what she had thought was possible. The approaching Christmas season had added an extra dimension of anticipation to the final weeks of Catherine's pregnancy. The family's Christmas traditions were elaborate and meaningful, involving multiple celebrations with different parts of the extended royal family, as well as their own private observances. This year would be particularly special, with the possibility that their new baby might arrive in time to be part of the holiday celebrations. Catherine had been working with the palace staff to ensure that all Christmas preparations could be easily adapted depending on when the baby decided to make an appearance. Plans had been made for celebrating Christmas in the hospital if necessary, or for modifying the traditional family gatherings to accommodate a newborn and new parents who might need more flexibility in their schedule. The children had been particularly excited about the prospect of a Christmas baby, imagining the special magic of having their sibling arrive during the most wonderful time of the year. Charlotte had suggested that if the baby was born on Christmas Day, they should be given a special Christmas-themed middle name. George had calculated the mathematical probability of a Christmas Day birth and had announced his findings to anyone who would listen. Louis had decided that Santa Claus would definitely bring extra presents for a Christmas baby and had already started making a list of things the baby might need from the North Pole. As December progressed and Catherine entered the final month of her pregnancy, she found herself experiencing the familiar mixture of physical discomfort and emotional anticipation that characterized the end of pregnancy. The baby was active and healthy, often making their presence known through vigorous kicks and movements that reminded Catherine constantly of the new life growing within her. She had been experiencing the usual signs that labor was still some weeks away, but Dr. Mitchell had warned her that babies often had their own ideas about timing, particularly fourth babies who might arrive more quickly than their older siblings. All of the medical preparations were in place, and Catherine's hospital bag had been packed and ready for weeks, containing everything she would need for the birth and the immediate recovery period. William had been particularly attentive during these final weeks, adjusting his schedule to ensure that he was never far from Catherine and could respond quickly if labor began unexpectedly. He had cleared his calendar for the 2 weeks around Catherine's due date, wanting to be completely available for the birth and the precious early days with their new baby. The nursery was complete and ready, with all of the baby's clothes washed and organized, the changing supplies stocked, and the feeding equipment prepared. Catherine often found herself standing in the doorway of the room, imagining the moment when they would bring their newborn home and begin the adventure of life with 4 children. On a particularly cold December evening, exactly 2 weeks before Catherine's due date, the family had gathered in the sitting room for their traditional evening reading time. George was sharing a chapter from a book about space exploration. Charlotte was working on a drawing of the family that included a space for the new baby, and Louis was building an elaborate structure with blocks that he announced was a castle for his future sibling. Catherine was settled comfortably in her favorite chair, feeling the baby's gentle movements as she listened to George's animated reading. William was nearby, occasionally reaching over to place his hand on her bump when the baby's kicks were particularly strong. The scene was peaceful and content, filled with the quiet happiness that had characterized so much of Catherine's pregnancy. As the evening wound down and they began the process of getting the children ready for bed, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for this time of anticipation and preparation. Soon, very soon, their family of 5 would become a family of 6, and their quiet evening routines would be joyfully disrupted by the needs and rhythms of a newborn. But for now, she was content to savor these last peaceful moments before everything changed, surrounded by the love of her husband and children, carrying within her the precious new life that would soon transform their family in the most beautiful way possible. The journey from that first conversation about expanding their family to this moment of imminent arrival had been filled with joy, anticipation, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the abundance of love that surrounded them. As Catherine settled into bed that night, feeling the baby's quiet movements as she prepared for sleep, she whispered a silent prayer of thanksgiving for the healthy pregnancy, the supportive family, and the incredible blessing of being able to experience the miracle of new life once again. Tomorrow would bring them one day closer to meeting their 4th child, and Catherine fell asleep filled with peaceful anticipation for all the beautiful moments that lay ahead.